second Sunday in Advent, we get to hear from one of the prophets, Malachi. And as you know, the Old Testament is full of prophets with these prophetic utterances. And most of the time, they are not happy, light-filled prophecies. They're dark and gloomy. And in Isaiah, we hear, "Band together, ye peoples, and be dismayed. Listen, all you far countries, gird yourselves and be dismayed." And they go on like that again and again and again. And it may be hard to figure out, what is this? What is this? Well, remember, in American life, we have all sorts of warnings and prophecies uttered all around us, and most of the time we ignore them. You know, that little label on the side of your cigarette packs. "Warning, the Surgeon General has determined." And people smoke anyway. And we have other kinds of warnings around us. If you don't lower the amount of sugar and fat in your diet, you know, things will happen. If you don't get enough exercise, things will happen. And so warnings fall on us all the time, just like Old Testament prophecies. And what do you do with them? Well, most of the time we tend to ignore them, but we ignore them sometimes to our peril. In 1971, there was a failure that most people don't know about. In spite of all sorts of safeguards, on February 20th, 1971, the emergency broadcast system was inadvertently activated. And the signal for a real nuclear attack was sent out. And all the radio stations, all the television stations were supposed to put this on the air. And all the wire services picked it up, just like they were supposed to. And it included those terrible words, "This is not a test." And what happened was the majority of American broadcasters just ignored it. They thought it was a mistake, and it was. But there was a second message sent out that was to authenticate the first one. And it had embedded in the message a special code word. Tell them, this is the real deal. This is the real deal. And yet only one television station in all of America shut down as they were told they had to do. It's a federal law. Just one. Just one station in the whole country treated it as seriously a message as it was. 30 years later, this isn't the only serious warning that's been ignored. Today, I read more and more about a developing problem around the world with oil. That we're just not going to be able to produce 87 million barrels of oil a day like we have been. And if you're wondering, well, when is the economy going to come back? The question is increasingly, how can it? You don't have enough oil to power it. And that's what powers the economy. And yet, the American government, doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans, will not touch this problem. They don't want to talk about it because it's such bad news. So if you've ever wondered, why isn't John the Baptist heeded by everyone who hears what he has to say, it's because, well, people just don't. We don't want to hear the bad news. He went into all the country around the Jordan preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And his job was to warn the people that the Messiah was on the way. And some heeded what he said, and many did not. On the second Sunday of Advent, we hear the voice of John the Baptist crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord. Get ready." And this message is being brought to us because the world without Christ is a wilderness. How do you face the future if you think everything's going to end? If you think there's a nuclear attack underway? If you think it's the end of cheap oil? If you think Katrina's going to hit? How do you face the future without Christ? Because he's the light of the world. He's the one who brings us hope. of joy and peace. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we have a wonderful, wonderful little moment in this book when Lucy stumbles through the wardrobe into this fantastic country of Narnia. And in Narnia, she stumbles into midwinter. But back on the other side of the wardrobe in England, it's high summer. And she meets Mr. Tumnus, who's a faun. And Mr. Tumnus tells her, oh, it's always winter in Narnia because of the White Witch. It's she who makes it always winter and never Christmas. Now, how about that? How about that? That's what the world would be like without Christ. Always winter and never Christmas. Now, last week when we set off on this Advent journey, we lit the first Advent candle. We read several passages from the Bible that directed us toward this future where we considered the end of time, the apocalypse. And on the second Sunday of Advent, our readings send us in the opposite direction. We look back to the past to hear the words of these ancient prophets who wrote thousands of years ago. And can they have anything to teach us? Oh, sure. Oh, sure. And in the distant past, we hear about this figure. Malachi is predicting that we're going to have someone come telling us to prepare the way of the Lord. And he speaks of a messenger who will call people to purify their hearts the way gold and silver are purified. And the way they were purified was they were heated up and melted. And then the impurities were skimmed off the